Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having an amazing morning on this lovely Thursday, 30th of September. Thank you very much for joining us this morning on our webinar pertaining to the demand-driven technologies solution, Replenishment Plus. Joining me today is Victor, who's one of the main guys there, and will be taking us through the solution today. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself. I'll let Victor introduce himself, and then we'll go into who we are at OneKloudX. We'll talk, and then we'll jump into the actual solution. So a bit of housekeeping to start with. If you need to know where your toilets are, I'm sure you know where they are and where you are. If you need to know where the exits are, I'm sure you know where they are as well. Just down the hall, turn left or right, and I'm sure you'll find it. If you don't have to turn your phones off because you're probably on silent, but if you do want to ask any questions, there is a chat that's available. Please type in your questions and we'll answer them as we go. And we want to make this as interactive as possible for you. And we are recording this session as well, so we can share this to you post the event. So thank you very much. My name is Robert Jersek. I'm the CEO of OneKloudX. We're a NetSuite solution provider located all over the country, and we've been in business. I've personally been in running ERP with NetSuite and other ERPs for the last 20 years now. So we're well versed with the actual solution, and I'll hand over to Victor to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hello, good morning, everyone. So happy to be speaking with everyone this morning. My name is Victor Hart. I'm an account executive with Demand-Driven Technologies. I've been with Demand-Driven Technologies for about 2.5, going on 3 years now. And prior to that, I spent about 5 years working in ERP with manufacturers and distributors based here in the US. So very familiar with the space that I imagine most of you folks work in, and have been working with Demand-Driven Technologies now, helping to deliver fantastic supply chain solutions to manufacturers and distributors all around the globe.
Thank you, Victor. So the agenda today, we've just gone through a bit of the housekeeping and introductions. We will like to discuss the limitations of some of the traditional MRP functionalities that are contained in the ERP solutions today. And Victor will talk you through how the solution that DD Tech bring to the forefront of how they can improve the supply chain using their Replenishment Plus MRP solution, and some of the proven success that they've had as a result. And then he'll jump in and give you a bit of a demo, and then we'll open it up for some Q&As as well. But as we go on, please ask and chat. Enter any questions in the chat as you'd like. So a little bit about OneKloudX to start with. So the team and I have implemented NetSuite over 100 organizations now in distribution, manufacturing, non-for-profit financial space. And as part of that, we always try to align ourselves with some of the best of breed solutions out there to complement the NetSuite solution, predominantly built on the NetSuite platform. So my business is about helping organizations get powerful insights to help them have the right data to the right person at the right time in the right format, in order to help them make the right decisions with products that are built on the cloud and are deployed on the cloud. Not single tenant, predominantly multi-tenant products is where we work in, because the upgrades and those elements of single source of truth is first and foremost the most important when it comes to tech in a growing business. So that's who we align with, and some of the actual products that we align with, and some of the suite apps and solutions we align with, in addition to DD Tech, is Almo, Fast4 from an AP automation standpoint, Infinite Cloud from a NetSuite payroll solution, Soligo integration-wise, Easy Collect. We're also a Salesforce partner and also a deputy partner as well. So we align ourselves with the best of breed solutions that are built on the NetSuite platform first and foremost. And in the event that where there isn't, then we align ourselves with other best of breed cloud solutions that have full integrations into NetSuite, which is the hybrid suite apps that everyone's aware of. So I'll hand it over to Victor to present his side of the event. Thanks, Victor.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. So demand-driven technologies, we are a software as a services company, and our singular focus as an organization is to empower our clients to achieve tangible and sustainable results across their supply chain. And I'll talk about what those results from a KPI metrics mean. But we do that via what's called a demand-driven MRP or DDMRP supply chain planning methodology. And here in a moment, we'll get into the details of what comprises DDMRP and what makes it so different from the traditional planning methodologies that have been on the market. To give you a little bit of background about us as a company, we were founded in 2011, based in Atlanta, Georgia in the United States, but we have a couple other offices around the world, as well as a very deep bench of great partners such as the OneKloudX folks that help us support our clients that are based all around the world. We've implemented with over 100 clients on 6 different continents. And so we're very much the global leaders in terms of demand-driven MRP implementations. We were the first to market with a full suite of demand-driven products that are fully compliant across all of the demand-driven institutes certifications. As I mentioned, we're the most widely adopted DDMRP tool in the world, and we're built natively on NetSuite, meaning that we are the only DDMRP solution native to NetSuite. So there's no integrations that have to be managed or anything along those lines. Everything, as you'll see once we get into the demonstration, everything lives within your existing NetSuite ecosystem. And here are just a few of our clients. Some logos you might recognize, some you might not. Now, not all of these logos are NetSuite clients. We have a standalone solution as well that integrates with many other ERP systems, but some of these clients are NetSuite users. The main takeaway that I wanted folks to have from this slide is that this methodology that we're going to be reviewing today, the demand-driven planning methodology, has been proven to be successful amongst many different verticals within the manufacturing and distribution space, many different types of manufacturing, be it discrete manufacturing, process manufacturing, so on and so forth. So within NetSuite, we have a couple of products, so to speak. What we're going to be focused on today, as Rob mentioned, it's called Replenishment Plus. This is our flagship product, and it's a demand-driven materials planning tool. So as we'll see, it is going to generate recommendations as to when new supply orders need to be generated to help align inventories for what the actual market demand is. Then we also have a sales and operations planning tool that helps to project this out into the future to anticipate future supply and production needs, warehousing needs, better plan around promotional activities and the like. Only going to have time to cover the materials planning section here this morning, but if anybody is interested in learning more about the S&OP processes, let Rob know. I'd be happy to set up some time to get into that with you folks. So I'd like to talk about why DDMRP was developed in the first place, and that was to address the limitations that are inherent within the existing MRP solutions, which, as I'm sure most of you know, MRP is the primary planning logic that's built into all of the major ERP systems. It was introduced back in the 70s, and the logic really hasn't evolved since then. Essentially, the way that MRP works is it's entirely reliant on a sales forecast or sales projection that gets applied at the finished good level. The MRP engine blows that forecast down through the bill of material, and that's what drives our planning practices. But there's one flaw, giant flaw, that's inherent in that logic, and that's the assumption that the forecast is going to be accurate. As we know, forecasts by definition are inaccurate. The more precise we try to be, the more profound that inaccuracy becomes. And what happens is over time, if we rely on that inaccurate forecast to drive our planning, we're going to end up with our inventories being misaligned with what the actual market demand is, and what we call a bimodal inventory distribution. And all that means is that at any given point in time, you're going to have some materials where you've got too much of them, other materials where you've got too little. So some materials we've got capital tied up in inventory that's not moving, while we're struggling in other areas with service levels, maybe missing out on sales or dealing with expensive expedites or things like that. Basically, too much of the wrong and too little of the right. And what we found is that folks frequently kind of flip-flop back and forth between those two positions as they try to react to these various these misalignments. That's what is frequently referred to as kind of the noise, or the noise within the MRP system. The bullwhip effect can really play into that quite as well. And then often users then don't trust the signals that they're getting out of their MRP engine, and then they take data outside of the software, put that into some kind of spreadsheet in an attempt to plan more accurately. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with all of that I was talking about there. So DDMRP was developed and introduced to address all of those challenges. And essentially what it is, it's a fusion of key principles from MRP, lean, and theory of constraints. So DDMRP borrows aspects from these various different pillars of supply chain management and combines them into what we believe is really a best of breed solution. And the main way that it's going to be different is, rather than relying primarily on that forecast, that inaccurate forecast to drive our planning, DDMRP is going to rely on actual consumption to drive our planning practices. And so only actual demand within a relevant range is going to impact the planning equation. That's going to give us the best demand signal and a near perfect signal in terms of what's going to be sold and when it's going to be sold. And when I talk demand throughout the presentation today, I'm talking about consumption of materials. And so demand could be sales coming in from your customers, so consumption of finished goods. It could be the consumption of raw materials going through the production process. It could be the transfer from one facility to another. Basically, anything that's going to be consumption against materials is considered demand. So what you'll see when we get into the software is, to align inventory to what the actual market demand is, we're going to leverage what are called DDMRP buffers. These buffers are applied at the item location level, and they're designed to ensure constant material availability. There are 3 zones within each buffer. At the top, we have the green zone. This is set to support an average order size, or MOQ, or order frequency. There are multiple ways that we could, or multiple techniques we could use to size the green zone. So if we have a minimum order quantity on a purchased good, we might use that to size the green zone. But that might not be the most appropriate. Maybe there's a specific order cycle that we want to use instead, to ensure that we, say, create new supply orders on a weekly cadence. We can use the green zone to follow that accordingly. The next zone within the buffer is called the yellow zone, and that's sized to cover usage over a lead time. So over one given lead time, on average, how much of an item are we consuming? And the 2 critical components that go into that calculation are, of course, the lead time, as well as what's called our average daily usage, which is simply a rolling historical average of our consumption. As that consumption changes on a daily basis, that's going to impact the equation here and cause the yellow zone to resize itself. And then lastly, the red zone, that's the safety that's embedded within the buffer. The red zone protects me against variation, whether that's variation on the demand side, such as seasonal demand patterns, Could be variation on the supply side, if my supplier is inconsistent with their lead times. All of that is variation that I need to be protected against. And the more variation there is with an item, the thicker the red zone is going to be to protect against that. It's similar in concept to traditional safety stock, but the big difference is that the buffer is resizing itself every single day in response to fluctuations in demand. So it ensures that we always have an appropriate amount of protection based on the demand fluctuations that we've been experiencing. So we apply those items or the buffers at the item location level, and then we know when to order and how much based on what's called our net flow equation and where that falls within the buffer. And the math on the net flow equation, it's really quite simple. It's my current on-hand inventory plus any open supply that I have minus any qualified demand. And demand is going to qualify if it's due to be fulfilled either today or in the past, or if it's what's called a qualified spike, which is firm demand that's already within NetSuite that's due to be fulfilled in the future, such as a work order that's scheduled tomorrow, but the due date is soon enough and the quantity is large enough that we want to go ahead and factor it into the net flow today. And once we get into software, I'll talk about what those thresholds are. But the net flow, it's basically just a summary of everything that's flowing in and out of my location for that item. And the way that it works, if you look over here on the right, we can see that each one of these bars represents a different day. So on a daily basis, my buffer zones are resizing themselves in response to the actual demand coming in from the market. My net flow is going to start out at the top of the buffer. That's what this line right here represents. Over time, as we consume materials, that net flow is going to be decreasing with respect to the buffer. And then once it drops out of the green zone into the yellow zone, that's going to trigger an order recommendation with the quantity being enough to get the net flow back up to the top of the green zone. So we can see over time my net flow fluctuating around through the green zone. And then our actual on-hand inventory, represented by these plus signs, will be lower in the buffer there. And viewing where our inventory is within a buffer, especially over a historical period, gives us a good visual representation of how effectively we've been managing these items, and if we need to make any adjustments to our buffer configurations. So when we deploy DDMRP, there are really 5 steps that are involved. The first step, positioning. It's called strategic decoupling. What that means is that we need to determine where does it make sense to maintain these strategic stocking positions via the DDMRP buffers, because not necessarily is every item within an organization going to be buffered. We might still have some make to order or buy to order items. We might have some low runner items that we don't really need a dynamic buffer for. We can use a more static min-max approach. Generally, we see maybe 60-70% of items are buffered, but the percentage there can vary quite dramatically depending on the business model. A company that's doing mostly make to order or engineer to order items, we're not going to be keeping stock of the finished goods, so there's going to be a relatively low percentage of buffered items, but we want to maintain the appropriate stocking levels on the components so we can meet our lead time guarantees to our clients. So step 1 is our strategic decoupling. Once we determine where we want to apply these buffers, we then need to design their buffer profiles. And all a buffer profile is a way to group like items together to make it easier to manage all of the settings within a system. So we can group items with similar lead times and similar variability and assign them the same buffer profile. Different buffer profiles are going to cause the buffers to behave somewhat differently in response to fluctuations in demand. And we can have dozens and dozens and dozens of different buffer profiles built into the system. That's completely custom depending on the unique requirements of each one of our clients. Once we apply those buffers, then they're going to be dynamically adjusting throughout time, resizing themselves on a daily basis in response to the fluctuations in demand. And then the system, based on the buffer and the net flow logic, will generate recommendations as to items that I need to buy or make or transfer today in order to keep them in a healthy buffer zone. And as you'll see once we get in the software, very easy to accept all of those recommendations in mass in a automated process to free up time to focus on other critical aspects of the business. So putting it all together and going back to the tangible and sustainable results that we help our clients achieve. The ones that we see up here on the top are what we typically measure, and this is what we've helped many clients achieve over the past decade of implementing this methodology. As I mentioned, the goal of the buffers is to ensure constant material availability, so service level is our number one goal. Our clients typically see service levels between 97 to 99%. We've seen some manufacturing clients via the strategic decoupling be able to compress their cumulative lead times by as much as 80%. And I'll show you how we do that once we get into the software. And our clients have been able to do this while simultaneously reducing their overall inventory levels and freeing up capital, generally on average in the 20 to 45% range. So some really profound, really tangible and sustainable results that we've helped our clients achieve over the years. And we have lots of case studies that help illustrate this. So I've listed a couple here in the presentation. A couple of food and beverage clients, as well as a discrete manufacturing client, just so you can see results achieved in different business types. We have lots of additional case studies that I'm happy to share with anybody should you be interested. So just let Rob know and I can share those materials over with you. So Rob, unless there's any questions at this time, I'm going to go ahead and jump over into Replenishment Plus.
Go for it.
So I'm going to move you guys over here, and I am going to share my screen. All right. So as I mentioned, our software is built natively within NetSuite. So to access the solution, you're just going to log into NetSuite just as you would any other day. And then once you log in, the one thing that you'll notice is different is that now up here on the top ribbon, I have this Replenishment Plus tab. That's where all of our functionality is going to live. And so I'm going to open up and pre-populate a few tabs here just to help keep myself on track. All right, so my plan here is first thing I want to do is look at a specific part and show you the calculations that are going on automatically in the background. So this is something, a level of detail that you wouldn't necessarily go into for every part every day, but I think it's useful to understand how the system is working. And then I'll go a little bit more high level, take a look at kind of a day in the life of the planner. When I come into work every morning, how do I know what needs my attention? How do I accept all of these recommendations and ensure that I'm keeping my environment in good health? And so I'm going to look at a specific part here. I'm going to type in part PPJ into my search bar. So we'll see we've got the standard NetSuite inventory item record here, and then below that we have these two R+ records. The reason for that is because, again, we manage each item at the item location level. So we're going to have a different buffer for each one of those combinations. So I've got part PPJ at my region 1 location and also at my plant location here, which I'm going to open up to take a deeper look at. There's going to be a lot of information available here in these R+ records. So I'm just going to walk through this slowly here with you. At the top in the setup section, on the left, we've got some basic information about this item. The item name, along with links into the standard inventory record, the location, the planner responsible for this, the vendor, so on and so forth. Over here on the right, we see the replenishment method. I mentioned that not necessarily is every item going to be buffered. This item is, so in the replenishment method, we see it listed as buffered, but we might have some make to order items or buy to order items or min-max items. If we had those, the replenishment method is where we would dictate that. But this item, we're using a buffer to manage it. And below it, we see the buffer profile that's assigned to this item. And the naming convention here, the B11M, actually tells me a lot about this item. That means that it's a purchase part. The B indicates it's a buy part. That first one indicates it's a short lead time, which in this environment means the lead time is between 1 to 28 days. The second one indicates it's a low variability item. And then that M indicates that we're using a minimum order quantity to size the green zone. If, for example, this was a highly variable item, then the buffer profile assigned to it might be a B15M buffer profile instead. Over here on the left, I see my buffer sizing. This is showing me how the buffer is sized at this point in time today. So it's kind of like a snapshot in time. I can see my green zone, yellow zone, and red zone. And then instantly upon looking at this, I can tell that I have an order recommended against this item. And the reason for that is that my net flow, represented by this blue line here, is down in the yellow zone, which if you remember, that means that we're going to have an order recommended to get that net flow back up to the top of the green zone. I can also see my current on-hand quantity as well as my expected average inventory represented by that blue dot there. Now, we're never ordering specifically to the expected average inventory, but it's useful for me to know for benchmarking and comparisons purposes. So I can see a visual representation of my buffer zones and my net flow. If I want to take a look at the math behind there, it's laid out very clearly for me here in this buffer calculations tab. So the green zone, again, that's what sets our average order size as well as our ordering cadence. We're using a minimum order quantity to size the green zone for this item. We have an MOQ of 20, therefore my green zone is sized to 20. The yellow zone, this is what's sized to cover our usage over one lead time. And so we take that average daily usage figure, which I mentioned earlier. In our case today, our average daily usage is 6. So we're averaging 6 units a day of consumption. Multiply that by the lead time. We have a 10-day lead time on this item. That gives us a yellow zone size of 60. As you can imagine, if tomorrow I consume 50 of this item, that's going to cause that average daily usage figure to increase slightly, which in turn is going to cause my yellow zone to thicken itself slightly in response to that uptick in demand. Then lastly, we have the red zone, which is what protects me against variation. I'll take the average daily usage and the lead time into consideration for sizing the red zone as well. And then I apply what's called a variability factor to that. The variability factor is determined based on the buffer profile that we have assigned to this item. So on the left here, we see the math behind the buffer sizing. Then on the right, we can see my net flow equation, which again, my net flow is my current on-hand inventory plus any open supply that I have minus any qualified demand. That gives me a net flow position of 69 today, which is in the yellow zone, meaning I need to place a new supply order to get that net flow back up to the top of the green zone, which is at 110. So I've got a recommended reorder quantity of 41 units for this item today. If I want to get more granular than that and see, okay, what specific transactions are being factored into this net flow, I can come over into my part activity tab, and this will show me all of the open transactions that this item is currently featured on. Anything in red or blue is being factored into my net flow equation today. Red represents demand, blue represents supply. So as we can see, we've got our inventory up here on the top. We have some past due demand orders. Those are being factored into my net flow because, again, demand is going to qualify if it's due to be fulfilled today or in the past. We've got some supply orders here. And then we also have some bolded demand transactions, which might be difficult to see. These last two sales orders here that are in kind of bolder red, those are those qualified spikes that I talked about earlier. Firm demand already in the system that's due to be fulfilled in the future, but we want to go ahead and factor it into our net flow today. And typically the threshold that we establish for that is if the demand is due within one lead time, and if the quantity is greater than or equal to 1/2 of the red zone, then we'll factor that into our net flow today. So we can see we've got a 30 unit red zone today. Going back to my buffer calculation, I saw that I've got a 10-day lead time on this item. So any demand due in the next 10 days for 15 or greater units is going to qualify as one of those spikes. We can see the thresholds that we've got set up here. And so we have two future sales order fulfillments that are going to qualify there. This last demand transaction, this last sales order down here, the quantity is greater than half the red zone, but it's not due in the next 10 days. So I don't need to worry about that item or that sales order yet. I can just leave it out there in the future because something might change prior to falling in that lead time threshold. So I want to wait as long as I can before taking any action based on that item or that transaction. And any of these transactions, if you wanted to, for example, we've got a supply order up here that's a few days late. If I wanted to take a look at that supply order, I could click on this link here, which would pull up that, that purchase order here within NetSuite. The other thing that a planner might want to keep an eye on if they come into this level of detail is my running balance column. This shows me what my inventory position is going to be as these transactions come to fruition. And anytime that running balance goes into a negative quantity, that would indicate a stock out. So here, or a pending stock out or a future stock out. So we can see we've got visibility into that here at the item level. And in a little bit, I'll show you how Replenishment Plus will monitor the running balances for all items and then alert us if there are any that we need to look into further so we don't have to come into each individual item. Lots of other details in here that I'm not going to cover right now at this moment. So we looked at our buffer sizing on the left here, how our buffer is sized today. My part analytics on the right is going to show me a historical view of the buffer. And we can view whatever historical time horizon we want to. I'm just going to set this to the past 6 months and take some of these lines off of here. And so what we're looking at here is how my buffer has sized itself over the past 6 months. And we can see clearly the dynamic nature of the buffer. Back at the start of the time period, my buffer was, the top of the buffer was down below 150. Then over time, it grew, increased up to almost 200 or so, and then it's dropped back down a little bit. That's all being driven by our daily usage or our consumption of this item represented by this black line here. So as our consumption grew, our buffer grew along with it. And as consumption dropped out a little bit, our buffer shrank back down a little bit in response to that. I'll add my net flow line on here, and we can see clearly that the planner responsible for this item has been doing a really good job of following this logic. Every time that net flow line drops out of the green zone down into the yellow, the planner has done a good job of accepting the order that was recommended to get the net flow back up to the top of the green zone. And then we can see that our actual on-hand inventory follows that pattern to some degree. One lead time after the order is accepted, the on-hand inventory jumps up, indicating that we've received that order. And this view here gives us a very good visual cue as to how effectively we've been managing this item. Over time, what I want to see my on-hand inventory doing is fluctuating around the low to mid part of the yellow zone. Occasionally, it's going to drop down and consume some of the red zone like it does in this time period. Occasionally, it's going to jump up near the green zone, possibly even get into the green zone. That's all perfectly fine. That's what the buffers are designed for. Simply, we want to see it over time fluctuating around the low to mid part of the yellow zone, right around this expected average inventory line that we can see there. Now,
so question from Keith is, what happens if you
great.
get a demand spike that is unforecasted or unplanned, say 50% spike to average historic demand?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the red zone is intended to protect against those types of spikes. And so as we design our buffer profiles, we analyze historical demand to see if there is that kind of spiky behavior involved. And we can design the buffer or the buffer profiles to ensure that we have enough red zone that should protect us against that kind of spiky behavior. Now, we don't always want to have enough red zone to allow us to always fulfill really large spikes that come through, because that might mean that we've got a one-off event that is not going to happen again. And then if we had enough inventory to fulfill that spike in demand, for the rest of the year, we'd be carrying way too much inventory. And so what we typically do is we set up some sort of threshold such that a spike in demand comes through. We would say, we don't want to carry enough inventory to be able to fulfill demand spikes of this quantity. So we'll quote lead time on that, but then we'll also filter that demand out of the average daily usage equation such that the buffer doesn't drastically jump up in response to that one-off event. So to give a real world example, there's a client of ours in NetSuite that's a supplier of plastic packaging. And they've got fairly stable demand all throughout the year. They'll sell on a given item between maybe 10,000, 20,000 units a day. But then once a year, maybe twice a year, they'll get a crazy spike for several million units come through. Well, they're not expected to carry enough inventory to be able to fulfill a 1 million unit order immediately. So they quote lead time on that, and then we simply filter those orders out of the equation so their buffers remain stable throughout the rest of the year. Hopefully that answered your question there, but let us know if I need to expand on that any further. All right, so we've taken a look at our part analytics here. This gives us a visual of how successfully we've managed these items over the historical time period. If, for example, my inventory line was constantly near the bottom of the buffer, well, that might tell me that I need to thicken my buffers to get a little bit more protection in there. Whereas if the inventory was constantly up near the top of the green zone, that would tell me I'm carrying too much inventory. I can thin out my buffers, get that inventory a little bit leaner in order to get my inventories down back to where we need them. So all of this is being calculated automatically by the system on a daily basis in response to the transactions that are occurring within NetSuite every day. The system's going to give us recommendations as to when we need to place new supply orders for these various different types of items. Very easy to accept those recommendations from within an R+ record itself. So if I find myself in an R+ record, I can see that I've got an order recommended against this item. I can simply click create purchase order. That's then going to generate a new purchase order, just the standard NetSuite purchase order. Here, it'll take a second to populate, but we'll see that it'll then have my item that was recommended, the other various important details about that item. I can save that. and the purchase order is then going to go through whatever kind of process or workflow or approvals or whatnot are established around these transactions today. So easy to do it for a single item if you find yourself in an R+ record, but many of our clients are managing thousands, if not tens of thousands of items, and so there's no way that you could go R+ record by R+ record to accept these. We have to be able to do it in mass. And so that's where we can go a little bit higher level and talk about what does a day of a planner look like. So first thing I'm going to take a look at here is our planner's workbench. If I'm a planner, this is probably where I'm going to start my day every day. This is essentially, think of it like a dashboard that shows me everything that needs my attention. And I'm going to filter down to a specific location and a specific planner. So these are just some generic filters that we have in our demo account. We can set up additional filters as needed during an implementation. I'm going to be Frank at my plant location, and Frank's responsible for 24 items, and we see them all listed out here, and the color coordination instantly tells me or shows me what all needs my attention today. So all of these items down here that are in green, these are items where my net flow is in a good position. I don't have any orders recommended against these items today. I can move along, don't need to take any action against these today. The items here in yellow, these are buffered items. We can see their buffer profiles over here. So these are buffered items where the net flow is in the yellow zone, meaning I've got orders recommended against these items today, but they're not a super high priority, and I probably don't need to look at those in any detail per se. I can simply trust the logic, accept the recommendations to get the net flow back into where we want it and to keep that inventory flowing and aligned with what the actual market demand is. And then at the top, I've got my highest priority items in red. The 3 items we see listed here on the right, we can see that 2 are non-buffered. What that means is they're either make to order or buy to order items. So anytime demand comes in against a non-buffered item, it'll show up in red here so we can generate the supply order to fulfill said demand. I also have a min-max item here. So my minimum threshold has been crossed. Therefore, I've got an order to get that back up to the maximum. I don't have any buffered items in here, and so I probably don't need to look at any of these items in any detail. I can simply trust the recommendation here and accept all of these orders in mass. If I did have a buffered item up in red here, then maybe I would want to take a closer look at that item. Maybe if I can see at what percentage of my buffer is the net flow. If that net flow was very low within the buffer, then I might want to take a look at that item to say, hey, what's happened? How has my net flow gotten so low in this buffer? Has there been a one-time event that's caused this to occur, or is there some longer term trend that I need to be aware of and might necessitate making a change to the buffer? And if I wanted to take a look at these items, I could click that view button there to open up that R+ record that's in question. And then lastly in here down at the bottom in blue, these show items where my net flow is actually over the top of the green zone, indicating that I have too much supply planned and can look for opportunities to reduce said supply. Very common when we first implement with a client. This is kind of in line with that bimodal inventory distribution. They'll have a lot of items that are in red on the workbench, and then a lot of items that are in blue. Over time, though, we work our way down to where hopefully we have mostly green and yellow items. Very easy to get rid of the red items. We simply accept the recommendations against those orders. The blue items, harder to get rid of that. Often that's inventory that we already have. So simply we just don't order additional material and slowly chip our way through that inventory that we had until we get it down to an acceptable level. So the planner's workbench here shows me what all is going to need my attention. Then to execute on all of this, I can come over into my accept recommended orders window. All right. this is going to show me all of the items that R Plus is recommending I create new supply orders against. Again, we can set up filters as needed. Very common on the purchasing side of business will our clients filter around specific vendors and take care of all of their items vendor by vendor. We can filter around different types of items, purchase parts, make parts, distributed parts, so on and so forth. We can add in custom columns in here as well. So these are the default columns. I've got a few custom columns in my demo account. As we accept these recommendations, R Plus will always respect ordering parameters such as minimum order quantities, order maximums, and order multiples. I can see if we have the material available to build any of these items. And then, of course, we can add in additional custom columns as needed. But I'm going to hide those. I'm not going to do any filters here today. We can see we've got different types of parts listed. So a distributed part means we are transferring from one location to another, a make part, and then a buy part here. As I check mark these for approval, we'll see over on the right, the recommended order quantity is being populated. I could edit that quantity if I wanted to. So we can go one by one with these items if we want to, or I can simply check mark all. And then all that I have to do once I've selected all that I want to approve is click that generate orders button, which I'm not going to do in the demo account, but if I did, that would then generate all of the corresponding purchase orders, work orders, and transfer orders. We can consolidate same vendor purchase orders, consolidate same location transfer orders. So with a click of the button, we can create all of those transactions, at which point they would then go through whatever kind of approvals process you have established around those transactions already in NetSuite today. So very simple to accept all of those recommendations in mass. And then once I click that generate orders, if I went back to my planner's workbench, then I would see all of those items back in the green zone, which is where I want to be from a procurement and replenishment standpoint, is keeping my net flow within that green zone. That's going to help me align inventory to what my market demand is. That is how we, on a day-to-day basis, execute upon all of these recommendations based on the buffer and the net flow logic, which is one piece of the puzzle, but that's not a complete picture, because there could be scenarios where my net flow is in a good position, but based on the timing of supply and demand, I might have a issue, specifically a stock out issue, unless I can rearrange some of those dates, expedite, supply in, push demand out, that sort of thing. And that's where our R Plus alerts are going to come into play. These are alerting us to existing or future stock out events, so I can take whatever kind of action is available to me to prevent the stock outs from occurring. Again, we can set up various filters if needed. I've only got a few alerts in here, so no need to filter down in this window. There are three types of alerts within the system here, and they're sorted based on their priority. Highest priority, it's called a current inventory alert. That means that we are currently stocked out on this item. Stock outs are bad. We want to avoid them if we can, but we'll never be able to fully eliminate all stock outs for all time. So as those occur, we definitely want to be alerted in here. Word to the wise, just in the demo site, some of these dates are a little old, so don't pay too much attention to that. But the highest priority alert here is called a current inventory alert, meaning that we are currently stocked out on this item. A couple columns over here I want to call out. The bottleneck transaction. This would show me the transaction that caused this stock out to occur. And then the supply order to expedite shows me any open supply orders that I have that, if I were able to expedite them in, would alleviate that alert. So we don't have any populated in the demo account here, but a bottleneck transaction would be the demand that caused me to stock out, and a supply order to expedite would be any open supply that I could expedite in to alleviate that stock out. The next type of alert, it's called a material synchronization alert. This shows me items that, while I'm not stocked out today, based on the timing of supply and demand that's already in my system, I will stock out in the future unless I take some sort of action. So looking over here in the bottleneck transaction, for this example, this work order is due in the future, and when that work order comes to fruition, that will cause me to stock out unless I have an open supply order that I could expedite in prior to that work order being due. That would then prevent me from having a stock out caused by that work order. So material synchronization, we're not stocked out today, but based on when demand is going to be due, we will stock out unless I take some sort of corrective action. And of course, if I failed to do anything, eventually that bottleneck transaction comes due, at which point it's no longer a material synchronization alert. It moves up the priority list because that bottleneck transaction had caused me to stock out. And then the last type of stock of alert here, it's called the projected stock out. This shows me items that, while I don't have any future demand in the system already, that's going to cause me to stock out in the future. If my average daily usage continues at its current rate, I will most likely stock out unless I take some kind of action. So not necessarily is any action needed here, but there's the potential for it. And I like to think about these in terms of what makes the most sense to me is if I'm an online retailer that does same day shipping, I'm never going to have future demand in the system that I know when it's going to cause me to stock out, but I know what my average daily usage is. And if it continues at its current rate based on the open supply that I have and when I expect it to come in, then I might have an issue with stockouts there. So the buffering net flow logic shows me when I need to create new supply orders to keep my inventory aligned with true market demand. The R+ alerts window is going to show me any time that the timing of supply and demand is going to cause any issues with my stockouts. And then last thing that I want to cover here today, just for timing's sake, there's a lot within here that we didn't have time for. I want to allow some time for some questions here. So last thing, I want to talk about reporting. There's lots of reporting in the tool, but the most critical report, I would say, and what we use to judge the overall success of any implementation is called our buffer trend graph. This is how we judge the overall health of the environment. And so what we're seeing here, it's a 2-axis graph. The first thing we're looking at, the colors here in the background, this shows me the distribution of my parts based on where the net flow is within the buffer. And we can select a custom time horizon if we want to. But here at the start of this time period, we can see that I've got about 50% of my items where the net flow is in blue, indicating we've got too much supply for those items, a lot in green, and then some in yellow and red. And what we like to see, what we want to see over time is getting rid of those red and then slowly chipping away at the blue such that it becomes a very small percentage of my overall parts. And eventually I would want to see the vast majority of my parts here in the green or yellow. That would be indicative of a very healthy environment. And then on the right, we can include our inventory values, and we can see what our actual on-hand inventory is, represented by this purple line, and compare that to the expected average inventory. So we saw that a lot of our parts are in blue, so we can expect that our actual is going to be rather high as compared to what our expected average or our target inventory is. Again, what I would want to see over time is just what we see here, a downward trend in this on-hand value such that it eventually will become aligned with and fluctuate around this expected average inventory. that's going to be a good indication of a healthy environment and optimal inventory levels. And then, of course, we can filter this graph around different locations, different planners, different product types, so on and so forth, to help you kind of slice and dice and do comparisons around the organization and that sort of thing. All right, so that was a pretty high-level overview of Replenishment Plus and the DDMRP concepts. There's lots of more kind of minutia that we could get into in terms of managing promotions and seasonality and things of that nature. But I'm going to cut off there. We've got a few minutes left in the call here, and so Rob, I'll hand things back over to you. Are there any questions?
No additional questions that have come through.
Okay.
Maybe we jump back to the slide whilst I do that. I've got some questions that we usually have during engagements between us. One of them is, how do we handle new products? So how do we use...
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple different ways that we can manage new products, and there are a couple different types of new products that we might think of here. So on the one hand, we might have new products that are very similar to existing products, either a new version of an existing product or a such as the iPhone 12 compared to iPhone 11, or maybe a new option in the product line. You know, maybe I sell black pens and now I'm going to introduce blue pens to the market. That might be an example where we would expect the demand for the new product to closely mirror the demand for that previous product. And so what we can do is then link the two together such that the demand for the first product will be used to size the buffer of the new product. And so in my advanced section here, we can see the linked items here. And so if I were to link a new product, we would use the ADU of the pre-existing product, the average daily usage, to size the buffer for the new product. That's one example. Now, another example, we might launch an entirely new product line such that we can't link the new items to any existing items. In that case, we're going to have to leverage a forecast. We'll have to have some kind of sales projection telling us what we think we're going to sell. And we can use that forecast then to size the buffer via what's called a forecasted daily usage. So it's still different from that traditional MRP approach. We know the forecast is going to be inaccurate. We're not going to try to plan specifically to the forecast, but we're going to leverage it to size our buffers. And so rather than using a rolling historical average to size the buffer, we can use a rolling forecasted consumption to size the buffer, or we could blend the two together at some point. Say we'll take 45 days of historical, 45 days of forecasted, and average those out to give us the daily usage that's sizing our buffers.
One last question, which is one that we always get. Considering, you know, most of the organizations would be using NetSuite, and therefore would have a lot of data in there today, how do we manage the implementation approach on an existing NetSuite account?
Yeah, great question. So the implementation is an implementation engagement with our NetSuite clients generally takes, I think, 2 to 3 months. Can be shorter, can be longer. A lot of that depends on the integrity of the data that's already existing within NetSuite. But all of that data, item master data, like lead times, bills of material, and all of that, we'll simply leverage what's existing in NetSuite today. And as we go through the process, we set up these R+ records that live in the background of the system. Some of our clients elect to implement within their sandbox environment. You don't have to have a sandbox, though. We implement in production frequently as well. The important thing to consider, though, is as we set up these R plus records, they are completely unobtrusive, meaning they're not going to impact anything within the NetSuite environment until you make the decision to do so. Until clients make the decision to start accepting these recommendations, all of these R plus records are just living in the background as we set them up, and they're not going to impact anything else within the environment until we say, okay, it's time for us to go live. Frequently start accepting recommendations on a small subset of parts, do some parallel planning, get familiar with the system itself, as well as the logic, why the recommendations are what they are, how to interpret everything that you see in here. And that's something that our team on the implementations that we manage, we remain very closely involved in, just with the goal of ensuring a successful implementation, a successful go live, and then a successful partnership for many years.
I think we're pretty much coming to the end of the available time. Just to take you back to next slide quickly, is what we're offering clients today is a flow simulation game, which enables us to be able to take your data that you've got in your environment and be able to put it through a simulation of how would it work in utilizing what Victor's taken you through today, to be able to go through those products and look at that simulation for each and every one of them to then see how the data looks. So it's quite an easy process. It's we obviously go through getting all the NDA signed and the rest, and then we therefore install a very small bundle on your NetSuite account that effectively just creates a couple of safe searches that we're able to therefore take that data out of your NetSuite account, load it into the the DD Tech environment, the demo environment on their end, with those individual products, lead times, inventory, historical sales, all those bits and pieces, and then put it through its paces depending on different products you've got to then see how it's actually going to come out and work. And then I'm sure you'll therefore be quite surprised how much value it does give you when you do see it with your own data. So that's what we're offering today. Please reach out to me direct, and happy to start that process. Anything else, Victor, that I may have missed out on there?
No, I think you nailed it. And that simulation that Rob's talking about, that's how we help to ensure that every single client we bring on board with our solutions, we're going to be able to deliver those tangible and sustainable results. And so it's a great way to really tie the concepts together.
Perfect.
Seeing
well, thank you, everyone.
So to speak.
We'll bring this to a close. Appreciate your time, and we'll share the recording after this as well for you to send it through the ranks in your organization if you feel like anyone else is needing to see it. So thank you again. Thank you, Victor, for your time, and also thank you, Terry Ann, for arranging this. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks so much, everyone.